Hi, in this video we're going to use exact trigonometric ratios to make calculations. Now in the previous video we saw how we could calculate sine, cos and tan of nice angles, and by nice angles I mean like 45 degrees, 30 degrees and 60 degrees. These are angles we find in shapes like squares and equilateral triangles, for example. Now this was a table and we could use these values immediately to in here, but let's just actually work out these two again from scratch, like sine of 45 and sine of 30. Now remember how we found sine of 45. If you've got a 45 degree angle, you could have a unit square like this, a unit square, so side length 1, and then remember we split it in half to get a right angle triangle like this. And remember, using Pythagoras theorem, we could find the length of this diagonal. If we do Pythagoras theorem, you add the squares of the shorter sides and then square root it. So 1 squared plus 1 squared is 2, square root it, that's root 2. So I know I'm doing this a bit quick, but we did do this in the previous video. And remember, because this whole angle here is 90 degrees, if you cut that in half, that's going to be 45 degrees. So that angle will be 45. So if we wanted to find sine of 45 here, let's use SOHCAHTOA. Well, this one is sine, and remember that sine of the angle of interest is O over H. So if we label these sides relative to this angle of interest, we want the O and we want the H. Well, this side is opposite the angle of interest, so that's the opposite. So that's the opposite. And then this side here is the hypotenuse, the longest side of that right angle triangle, which is the H. So we can see that sine of the angle of interest, 45 degrees, is equal to O, which is 1 over H, which is root 2. So we know that sine of 45 is 1 over root 2. We also need sine of 30 as well. So to get 30 or 60, what you do is you start with an equilateral triangle of side length 2, and then you cut it in half like that. The reason we're using this is because we know the interior angles of a equilateral triangle is 60. And if that's 60 and that's 90, and these three angles add up to 180, that final angle would be 30 here. So we want to use the 30 here because we're doing sine of 30. So that's the angle of interest. Now, what are the other sides? Well, if this side is 2, because it's an equilateral triangle, that's also 2. And that will be half of it because it's cut exactly in half. So that would be 1. And then if you just use Pythagoras theorem, because you're finding one of the shorter lengths of the triangle, remember we do the difference of the squares and then root it to use Pythagoras. So we do 2 squared minus 1 squared, which is 4 minus 1, which is 3, square root it, and that's root 3. Again, sorry I did that quickly, but we did cover it in the previous video. Now, we then label these sides relative to this 30 degree angle of interest. So this is the opposite. This is the adjacent, and this is the hypotenuse. Now we're doing sine of 30. So sine of theta, remember, was O over H again. So we got sine of the 30 degree angle of interest is the O, which is the 1, over the H, which is 2. So, okay, we've got these values now. So this is equal to, if I just copy it down here, sine of 45 times sine of 30 is equal to sine of 45, which is 1 over root 2, multiplied by sine 30, which is 1 over 2. And you multiply the numerators, 1 times 1 is 1. Multiply the denominators, root 2 times 2 is 2 root 2. Now, does it ask you to do anything with it? Give your answer in its simplest form. Now, what that means is you want to rationalize the denominator, and hopefully you've already covered that. But basically, if you've got this third at the bottom here, so this square root, you times the top and bottom of your fraction by that. So we're going to times the top by root 2 and the bottom by root 2. And then what happens is that the 1 times root 2 at the top just becomes root 2. And then the root 2 times root 2 here just becomes 2. When you times a third by itself, it gets rid of the square root. So root 2 times root 2 is 2. Times by this extra 2, 2 times 2 is 4. So we get 4 at the bottom. So therefore the answer is root 2 over 4. And that is the final answer in its simplest form.